Thank you all for coming today to celebrate Holy Week first. But then there's this book that just came out, and we want to tell you a little bit about it. We're excited after working hard for quite some time to see it in print. For me, I've been working at this kind of research for 30 years, and I'm not always well understood. For example, when I first moved up here, when Tricia and I and the girls first moved to Gordon-Conwell, it happened to be Missions Week at First Congregational Church, and Valerie was only 4 years old, and so we sent her to Sunday school, and they asked her first thing, we had just moved from Singapore, they asked her first thing, does anybody here know a missionary? And Valerie raised her hand and said, my daddy's a missionary, but he never tells anyone about Jesus. So I thought, boy, the Sunday school teacher told me. So that week I worked really hard on her. I said, your dad, he's been working so hard. He went and got this degree and, doctoral degree and everything. So the next Sunday, before anybody could say anything, Valerie raised her hand in Sunday school and she said, my daddy's a doctor, but he can't help anyone. So that's the sum total of my contribution to the Christian church. But this was a chance with this book. Cindy and I were able to write together, and Cindy's going to come up in a few minutes and go in more in depth. I'm going to take you on a quick whirlwind tour through the book, just so you have some idea what it's about. You obviously see the title here, but let me start by saying anyone who's married will tell you how challenging it can be to get along with the two different extended families of the bride and the groom. While the groom ponders the strange behavior of the bride's relatives, the bride is likely to enlighten him about irregularities in his own family. Not that this is a personal story at all. Truth be told, you learn a lot about both families in the process. Although we both have so far learned to navigate this in our own journeys together with our spouses, we've recently been pondering how we've been challenged in the much wider context of our two global families. By the way, this is poor Ben Stiller with his CIA father-in-law, played by Robert De Niro in Meet the Parents, if you haven't seen it. We're born into the human race, one of our global families. As only two of more than 7 billion individuals, we are increasingly aware of both the joys and the challenges of getting along with this unfathomable mosaic of peoples, languages, ethnicities, religions, and cultures. For over 100 years, we've come together every 4 years, only recently alternating summer and winter, for a family reunion of sorts around our most accomplished athletes. These Olympic Games are generally a time of global solidarity and celebration, soon to be repeated in Brazil, South Korea, and Japan. But other get-togethers are not so pleasant. In recent global meetings, we've had grave problems agreeing on trade, global warming, nuclear weapons, on the front page of the paper today, and a host of other issues. Consequently, while we seem to have the know-how and the resources to live well on our planet, we flounder when trying to work together to save it. Nonetheless, the human family overflows with creativity, producing dazzling works of art, poignant films, beautiful music, and stunning works of literature. It's a great chaotic family to belong to, and we're glad to be a part of it. This is Yo-Yo Ma in the Silk Road Project, and he writes, as we open up to each other, we form a bridge into unfamiliar traditions, banishing the fear that often accompanies change and dislocation. In other words, when we broaden our lens on the world, we better understand ourselves, our own lives and culture. We share more in common with the far reaches of our small planet than we realize. Now, we were both we were both baptized into the Christian church as well, our other global family. The global family is made up of 2.4 billion people, about a third of the human family. This year, 45 million babies will be born into our family. 22 million of us will die. 16 million will join us as adult converts, and 12 million of us will defect, mostly to agnosticism. As a result, there'll be a net gain of 27 million Christians. That's a lot of new family members to become acquainted with. Now, we've been thinking a lot about this family, having recently completed the Atlas of Global Christianity. The Atlas documents major Christian traditions like Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, and so on, 300 minor traditions, Lutheran, Methodist, Baptist, also so on, and then 41,000 denominations, which, by the way, is now 45,000 since the passage of time. For example, there's 150, or more than 150, Presbyterian denominations in South Korea alone. In addition, Christians are now found in every country of the world. Our personal journeys wind their way through this international and ecclesiastical diversity, which brings me to this joke, which many of you, I've said it before, but I like it a lot. There's a guy on a desert island. He was there for many, many years. And finally, a ship came by to rescue him. And the captain came down on this little island. It was just amazed that this guy could live so long. And there were 3 huts. Here's the huts. 3 huts on the island. And so the captain said, "Tell me about your life here." And he said, "Well, this first hut is where I've lived all these years, and this second hut is where I go to church." And the captain said, "Well, what's the third hut?" And he said, "Oh, that's where I used to go to church." So just one person, and he can't stay in the same denomination. So that's one of the problems that we have. Now, this book is about identity, and one of the people we quote is our old friend Tim Tennant, who wrote what you see up there. "In the context of global Christianity, we must first and foremost see ourselves as Christians proclaiming the apostolic faith, and only secondarily as Reformed Christians, Pentecostal, dispensational, Armenian, both work. We must learn to think of ourselves as members of a massive global Christian movement that is looking more and more like John's vision in Revelation 7:9, which encompasses people from every nation, tribe, and language." Timothy Tennant. And in fact, that's really, in one sense, a nutshell of what we're trying to get at within the book. So thank you, Tim, very much. Here's what's in our book. First, we have part 1. We have an overview of how the world's changing in both religious and social dimensions. While these changes are more widely known today than they were just 40 years ago, we need to dispel some myths or conventional wisdom. First myth, Christianity is Western. That is a myth. Second myth, religion is disappearing. In the case of this myth, is saying that the world's becoming less religious. It's just the opposite, as we'll show in just a minute. And how about science will save the world? Another myth. Wonderful things for technology and science to do in the world, but it could also destroy the world, as we know. Chapter 1 gives a compact assessment of the status of Christianity around the world today in 2015 compared to 1900. This demographic overview highlights the profound diversity of the world Christian movement in traditions, denominations, languages, renewal movements, many other ways. It documents what you probably already know, the shift of Christianity north to south, from west to non-west, from Europe, North America, to Africa, Asia, Latin America. By the way, just recently we published a new statistic, which is not in the book, but it shows also another shift, and that is in 1900, 95% of Christians in the world lived in countries 80% or more Christian. Today, that's 52%, almost half. So Christians are increasingly living in more diverse and less majority Christian situations. In Chapter 2, we offer an overview of the changing religious scene globally with an emphasis on global religious resurgence, which is the case. While in the past, sociologists predicted the demise of religion, instead it has become more significant around the world, both in numbers and in influence. From the standpoint of Western countries, which show a rise in those leaving traditional religion, this seems counterintuitive. But globally, it looks like this. The number of people professing a religion is on the increase since 1970. So we have quite a bit of secularization, rise of communism, all the way through 1970, and then it reverses in the other direction with the collapse of communism. And remember, most atheists and agnostics in the world today are not Swedish, but Chinese. And the Chinese have a big influence on these numbers, and the Chinese are becoming less atheist and less agnostic over time. So it's continuing to move in that direction. The poor Swedes are becoming more atheists, but they don't do much for the rest of the world. I'm partly Swedish, so I shouldn't talk against my own people, but that's the way it is. So finally, in chapter 3, we discuss the phenomenon of globalization and how it's increased interconnectedness. The world has, in a palpable sense, gotten smaller. Issues that affect one part of the world have unprecedented potential to impact the rest of the world. In this chapter, we survey some of the world's major social, health, economic, and health. Oh, twice. It's really important. We are particularly interested in Christian participation in overcoming these challenges. Later in the book, chapter 11, we examine how Christians and others are working for the common good. And by the way, if you missed it, Nicholas Kristof in Sunday's paper talks about how important Christian and evangelical contributions are in making a difference in the world. But he chides both liberals and evangelicals for refusing to work with each other. And he calls it the God gap. That's something to follow up. Part 2, our changing identity. We look at how the changes in Part 1 have impacted Christian identity around the world. We feel that as Christian diversity increases globally, there's a greater need to emphasize similarities of our shared faith. Consequently, we draw on a wide range of sources to explore unity and diversity. At its core, globalization is about shifting forms of human contact. Increasing contact between Christians around the world sparks reflections on our identity. In chapter 4, we explore identity issues and the implications of complexities of globalization, both for Christian identity and for relating to other religionists, which we look at in more detail in chapter 8. We lay out a vision of a new humanity identity, one that glorifies God through the diversity in unity of its members. Local churches, then, are bridging places, centers of reconciliation, where all the major diversities that separate human beings are reconciled through the power of the Holy Spirit. But Christians also belong to the global human family. As members of common humanity, we should express our concern for all. Chapter 5, we are concerned with global concepts and identity. At the core of our argument related to global Christian identity, which Tim Tennant mentioned earlier, we find centuries of writings on the subject of global citizenship. While these originated in Greek philosophy, they gained strong Christian support, especially from Augustine. We build on this literature in making a case for a primary global Christian identity. And this might be one of our features of the book, see if we can convince people. Christianity can and should go deep within each culture of the world, but at the same time is never fully at home in any particular culture. It's this dynamic between the local and the universal that we can better understand global Christian identity. And here we're following Andrew Walls in the indigenizing and pilgrim principle, for those of you familiar with that. Chapter 6, we look at how Christians shape their local identities through contextualization, incarnational ministry, indigenous theology, and worship. Christians depend on the biblical revelation that is universally true, but the Christian message is planted in the soil of every people on earth and produces a unique plant in every case. We look at ethnodoxology, worship in different cultures, and how it enriches our global Christian family. Robin Harris is going to be here tomorrow and teaching in our BU class. She's one of the experts on ethnodoxology. In light of our findings, in Part 1 and 2, in Part 3, we ask how these realities might apply to our relationships with others. As stated earlier, we're deeply concerned about the divisions both in the Christian family and in the human family. We tell our own stories of ecumenical and interfaith involvement here in Boston and in Houston. We examine the problems in each and then set forth some strategies that might be used to remedy both. A week ago, I was at the American Jewish Committee Diplomats Seder over at the JFK Library, 500 luminaries and me. And we had the testimony of two different people. One was a Holocaust survivor, 90 years old. He jumped out of a window. All of his relatives perished in the Holocaust. The other was a descendant of Armenian genocide survivors, a Syrian Armenian Christian. And we heard these two stories, and I should have put my button on, meet the moment. There was a moment back 3,000 years ago at the Passover, there's moments now, too, when we have to step forward in courage. And my Jewish friends were encouraging me to step forward in courage. So there's a lot of commonality there. Then in chapter 7, how do we relate to other Christians? We look briefly at the 20th century strategies at Christian unity and contrast these with some current strategies. Okay, and chapter 8, we extend this to relationship with people in other religions. And in order for evangelicals in particular to navigate the crossroads of a multi-faith world, we must understand how to view ourselves and others religiously. In chapter 9, we look at how we might more effectively build relationships with others, Christians and non-Christians. And we examine the biblical values of hospitality and friendship. My wife, Tricia, teaches English to people at Park Street from all over the world, but we also have had exchange students in our home. And we invited a student from France one time. Turned out that she was from a Muslim family based in Tunisia, but living in France. And we asked her at the beginning of the time with us, 3 weeks, what do you like to eat? And she said, vegetables. And we said, you mean you just want vegetables and nothing else? And we were a little puzzled by it, and she wasn't too forthcoming, so Tricia said, would you eat halal meat? And she said, oh, yes, halal meat, meat that's kosher for Muslims. And so we decided as a family to eat halal the whole time, so there wasn't anything else in our house. And she told her parents, and they were very grateful to us for taking such good care of their daughter. So there are opportunities like that to reach out. Then we talk about changing our world. We ask how global Christian identity impacts our role in human flourishing, and we examine what Christians are doing around the world. In chapter 10, we draw from 3 voices that address the limitations that we have in changing the world. Some of you know James Davison Hunter's book, To Change the World. A second book is Tyler Wiggs Stevenson's book, The World Is Not Ours to Save. And finally, we look at Rabbi Jonathan Sacks' book, To Heal a Fractured World. And we look at some of the wisdom offered in those 3 books on what we can do, or what we can't do. Then we look at what we can do in chapter 11, practical ways that we might help the poor, heal the planet, work for justice. Well, all this is related to the theme of commonality. We think that the biblical case for commonality, both in the Christian community and with the human community, is very strong. Yet the world and the church seem to lead people in the opposite direction of emphasizing difference instead of similarity. Understanding this and applying practical means to overcome it will be one small but significant step in the right direction. And this is born out of our personal conviction and experience. And I'll end with this for my segment here. In December of 1979, I found myself on the Thai-Cambodia border in the world's largest Cambodian refugee camp, Khao Dung, 135,000 people living in 1 square mile. I was part of Youth with a Mission team, and I was working for the International Committee of the Red Cross, constructing hospital clinics out of bamboo and wire. At one point, I was the only American on my team, which consisted of Europeans, Africans, and Asians. As we worked together among the Thais and Cambodians, we clearly did not represent any single national, political, ethnic, or social agenda. We represented many different denominations who were from all over the world. We were there as part of the human family, and specifically the global Christian family. It was there in Thailand that I first realized that my fundamental identity was as a follower of Jesus Christ, not as a Scandinavian Lutheran from Minnesota. Cindy, would you come up and lead us further?
So now we're going to focus our attention on the core message of our book, our changing identity and how our understanding of identity impacts the way we view and treat others. Identity today is complex and multifaceted, and it deserves some reflection. We all possess multiple identities in relation to others. I am a mother, daughter, sister, friend, and neighbor. And in this technological age, most of us possess multiple digital identities as well. And so we are constantly navigating different expressions of ourselves, usually without being fully aware of it. Identity can be about sameness, and identity can be about difference. Let me illustrate this for you. Once I saw this guy on a bridge about to jump. I said, "Don't do it." He said, "Nobody loves me." I said, "God loves you. Do you believe in God?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you a Christian or a Jew?" He said, "A Christian." I said, "Me too. Protestant or Catholic?" He said, "Protestant." I said, "Me too. What franchise?" He said, "Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist?" He said, "Northern Baptist." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist." I said, "Me too." I asked, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region or Northern Conservative Baptist Eastern region?" He said, "Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes region." I said, "Me too. Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1879 or Northern Conservative Baptist Great Lakes Region Council of 1912? He said, 1912. I said, "Die, heretic," and I pushed him over. The joke illustrates the problem that many of us identify with what sets us apart. Many Christians identify primarily with the most narrow of Christian affiliations. In the opposite vein, we are advocating primary identification at the broadest Christian affiliation. This is, in fact, what we mean by our global Christian family. As Christians, we are often torn in our identity allegiances. In political matters, do we identify first as followers of Jesus or as Republicans or Democrats? In global matters, do we identify first as Americans and look out for our own interests, or as global citizens and consider the interests of the whole world? I am a second-generation Asian American, the daughter of immigrants from Taiwan. For those of us, and I've lived most of my life in Houston. For those of us who are third culture citizens like me, there is another layer of identity confusion. In cultural matters, I have to ask myself, am I Chinese? Am I Taiwanese? Am I American? Am I Texan? When it comes to identity, I've come to realize that the answer to that question is all of the above. As the global population grows, the world is becoming infinitely diverse. Increasing diversity arouses questions of identity. How do the shifts within the religious landscape impact the way Christians view themselves and one another, both as members of the global Christian family and as members of the global human family? Is our primary Christian identity our local identity or our global identity? How can we be faithful to our own beliefs while being generous and engaging with others, especially when it comes to working for the common good? These are some of the questions we address in our book. Answering these questions requires a new approach to identity, one that emphasizes the universality of Christian community and common humanity. What you see here is an image from the Netherlands of the graves of a Catholic woman and her Protestant husband, who were not allowed to be buried together. A wall divides them, even in death. Sadly, this is what the church looks like when we cling too closely to exclusionary identities. Within our global Christian family, identifying by what makes us different has resulted in a very fragmented church. As Todd mentioned earlier, this year we will be able to account for about 45,000 denominations. That's right, 45,000. Only by embracing common identity will we be able to lower the walls between us and come together in unity as Christians. We're not saying we should overlook differences. Not at all. We're saying we should be quicker to look for commonalities. While there are many sincere reasons for forming new groups, we must take division very seriously, especially in light of the fact that the gospel of Jesus Christ promotes unity. Ephesians chapter 2 says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility. His purpose was to create in himself one new humanity, out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross. This new humanity identity is the key to being a part of a global family. New humanity identity recognizes the imago Dei, or image of God, in every person on the planet. New humanity identity celebrates diversity in unity. But what does diversity in unity look like? Diversity in unity does not seek to erase differences in a colorblind approach, which intentionally overlooks differences in favor of assimilation to a standard that's often determined by the dominant culture. Colorblindness tries to pass itself off as a virtue. But by indiscriminately undervaluing or ignoring difference, it can end up operating as a civilized form of racism. Descriptive labels can easily turn into value labels whereby we accept or reject others based on their agreement with us rather than what they can bring to the table. So we are not advocating for a homogeneous solidarity in which ethnic identity or distinctiveness is lost. Rather, we think we should view difference as an opportunity to learn from one another. New humanity understanding for our global Christian family anticipates a time when people from every nation will worship together before the throne of God. God has always designed to use the church, the global Christian family, in all her diversity and unity glory, to gather all nations from our global human family to himself. I imagine that heaven will be a little bit like an experience that I had from, 1 year on furlough when my husband and I returned from China for just a short visit over the holidays. We were driving home from the airport, and my husband David, his mother said that we would be having a cousin join us for the holidays that year. And we were really surprised because we didn't even know this cousin existed. So we walked through the door and we did a double take. This cousin looked so much like my husband that he could have been his twin. That year, we were delighted to welcome an unexpected family member to our table. And we enjoyed the realization that our awareness of family had just expanded. This is what being part of a global family is like, discovering that on this planet there are people with whom you share so many similar traits, you truly belong to the same family. And this is what heaven will be like one day, an eternal and joyous union of unexpected family members, all sitting at the heavenly banquet table and worshiping in one accord. So besides talking about Christians getting along with other Christians, our book also talks about Christians getting along with people of other faiths. This is called the Interfaith Challenge. At the turn of the 20th century, many sociologists predicted the demise of religion. Religion has not only survived, it has thrived. And the result has been a religious resurgence, not only numerically, but also in terms of diversity. In order for evangelicals to navigate the crossroads of a multi-faith world, we must understand how to view others and ourselves religiously. Part 3 of our book offers a condensed theology of religions and then some perspectives on paradigms of interfaith dialogue. Now, one of the chief concerns of Christians who are willing to engage is how to do so without capitulating on core beliefs. We might agree with the idea of getting along with others, but how to do it creates a lot of anxiety. How do we hold fast to a strong Christian identity while engaging with others? What does solidarity look like? And how do we achieve solidarity in light of such a plurality of beliefs and different worldviews? We often feel like this, that we're caught in an either-or scenario. Either we have a weak faith that allows a gracious view of others, or we hold to conviction with hostility. In our book, we advocate for what Richard Mao, President Emeritus of Fuller Seminary, calls a convicted civility, and what Christian activist Brian McLaren describes as a strong and benevolent attitude towards religious others. We need to take the best of both extremes and uphold a strong faith with a gracious spirit. We need to lower our suspicions towards others and view them first through our lens of common humanity. We need to be better informed about other religions and build more significant friendships with people of other religions. We need to engage in interfaith dialogue, and we need to practice hospitality. And by the way, one group we don't want to forget are those who do not identify with any particular religion or who identify as having no religion whatsoever. The 20th century saw a rise in atheism and agnosticism. Agnostics and atheists also need to be treated with respect and dignity, and this part of the book addresses some cooperative efforts between atheists and Christians. The greatest commandment tells us that loving our neighbor is only secondary to loving Christ. We can practice hospitality to build bridges. Local churches are centers of reconciliation. Our homes can be places where all the major diversities that separate human beings are reconciled through the power of the Holy Spirit. We as Christians, especially North American evangelicals, need to be challenged in our loyalties and our boundaries in order to navigate today's changing world. As Christian diversity increases globally, there is a greater need to emphasize the similarities of our shared faith. We need a broader sense of Christian identity as we attempt to express our faith in the myriad of Christian denominations and traditions worldwide. We also need to be better informed about other religions and build significant friendships with people. The vision of our global families is to help Christians engage in an increasingly globalized world. In 2015, 1/3 of humanity will belong to 45,000 denominations and speak 3,000 languages. Current growth rates anticipate the church will be 75% Southern by 2100. We rejoice in the diversity, but we are weighed with concern about division in the church. While there are many theological reasons for division, much of our struggle can be related to cultural and social differences, much more than we even realize. We need to evaluate how much of our theology and practice is shaped by culture rather than biblical truth. As Westerners, we would do well to allow Christians from other parts of the world to speak into our theology and practices. We are anticipating a global Christian future. And here is a tidbit of what we can expect. We can expect a rise of Pentecostal charismatic renewal, mostly through independent churches in the global South. Persecution is on the rise. Open Doors reported 100 million Christians persecuted for their faith in 2014, calling the levels of persecution historic. Many of the countries that rank lowest on the Religious Freedom Index are located in the global South. We can expect more indigenous forms and styles of worship rather than European hymns being translated. I'll never forget an experience that my husband and I had in China. We had been living there for about a year, attending a government-sponsored church in which most of the music that we sang was just European hymns that had been translated into Mandarin. And one day, they invited a group of seminary students whom we had befriended to lead worship. And so my husband was on the guitar and helping to lead, and the songs that we chose for that worship service were all songs that had been written by worship leaders in Singapore and Hong Kong. And as we started to lead these new songs for the church, people started raising their hands and weeping and clapping and shouting and worshiping God in a way that I had never seen. And it was a movement of the Holy Spirit, but I think there must have been something in hearing the Eastern-style melodies and the chord progressions and just the styling of the music was very different from what we had usually sung in the church. And that was just one experience that I had in which being able to sing in one's heart music, heart song, really brought out a different expression of worship. We can expect more contextualized systematic theology emerging from the global South. We are often unaware of how much the way that we read the Bible is influenced by our culture and our experiences. People from guilt-based cultures tend to read the Bible differently from people from shame-based cultures. People who have wealth tend to read the Bible differently from those who are poor or who are oppressed. I think in the West, we have exported so much of our theology that we tend to think of ourselves as authorities, but once you start reading more widely, you realize that we do not have a full-orbed theology and that we have much to gain from listening to global voices. And we can expect to confront issues of poverty. The countries with the lowest Human Development Index are all located in the global South. Many of these countries are also Christian-majority countries. Sadly, Christians are far from immune from tendencies of human nature to exclude and territorialize. Because of that, Christians need now, more than ever, to understand who we are in Christ as a global body and how our identity relates to the rest of humanity. We are all part of the global human family, and those of us who follow Jesus are part of the global Christian family. Family emphasizes both commonality and difference. We are related, but we are not all the same. We are global, but we are also local. We are pilgrims, we are also at home. These tensions create a dynamic that allows us to identify as one Christian family that is global while maintaining local particularities. Embracing an identity that views oneself as members of the global human family gives us the power to navigate diversities. Embracing an identity that views oneself and other Christ followers as members of the global Christian family promotes unity. We believe that these common identity perspectives will better equip Christians to engage a globalized world with knowledge, compassion, and humility. Thank you.